The late summer sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across my bedroom floor, when I stopped dead in the doorway. A chill prickled down my spine, sharp and uninvited. My vanity drawer, the one tucked beneath the mirror, where I kept my little secrets, was ajar. Not wide open, just enough to notice, like a whisper of something wrong. I stepped closer, the hardwood cool under my bare feet, and peered inside. The velvet pouch was there, but its drawstring hung loose, the contents shifted. My breath caught. Those Polaroids, snapped years ago on a humid anniversary night, all soft curves and candlelight glow, weren't where I'd left them. They were my private love letter to Tom, a gift from a wilder version of me, meant for his eyes alone. Now they felt exposed, violated. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady the thudding beneath my ribs. Mason had been home all week, back from college for the summer, his sneakers thumping through the house like a familiar drumbeat. He'd always respected my space, kept his distance from my room, my things. But this was a breach I couldn't unsee. I pictured him standing here, his broad shoulders hunched over the drawer, those sharp green eyes widening as he pulled the photos free. What had he thought? Shock, sure. Maybe a flicker of curiosity, too, warring with the polite kid I'd known for years. The images weren't just pictures. They were me, unguarded, a woman who still felt the thrill of her own skin. And now he'd seen that. How could I be so stupid? I muttered, my voice barely a rasp in the quiet room. The lavender scent from the diffuser on my nightstand, usually a comfort, turned cloying, thick in my throat. I'd tucked the pouch away months ago, thinking it safe behind a stack of scarves. Careless, reckless. My fingers trembled as I reached for the pouch, flipping it open. The Polaroids were still there, thank God, but out of order. Proof of prying hands. What did he think of me now? The stepmom who'd baked him cookies for his high school graduation. Now a woman laid bare in glossy squares? The thought twisted something deep inside me, a knot of dread and shame I couldn't untangle. I shut the drawer with a soft click, the sound final like a gavel dropping. The room felt smaller, the walls leaning in, their cream paint suddenly stark against the fading light. Mason was downstairs. I'd heard him earlier, the clatter of a spoon against a bowl as he raided the kitchen. He'd be sprawled at the counter now, probably, all lanky limbs and easy grins. But that grin wouldn't reach his eyes anymore, not after this. I could feel it, the shift, the unspoken power he'd stumbled into. He was smart, too smart, and he'd know what those photos could mean in the wrong hands. My hands curled into fists, nails biting my palms. I couldn't let this sit. I had to face him, to look into those eyes and see what he'd do with this. With a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders, years of boardroom battles steadying my spine. The pouch stayed hidden, but its weight clung to me, a secret I couldn't shove back into the dark. I turned from the vanity, each step toward the door deliberate, the hardwood creaking faintly under my weight. Downstairs, the kitchen waited, its warm light spilling into the hall, carrying the faint scent of the roast I'd left simmering. Mason was there, and so was the truth. I couldn't hide from either. Not anymore. The kitchen glowed under the soft hum of the pendant lights, a warm contrast to the storm brewing inside me. The roast's savory tang curled through the air, mingling with the faint clink of dishes as I stepped onto the tile. Mason sat at the counter, a car magazine splayed open in front of him, his long fingers tracing the edge of a glossy page. He looked up as I entered, his green eyes catching the light, usually open, almost boyish. But tonight they held something else, a guarded glint that set my nerves on edge. I smoothed my hands down my jeans, forcing calm into my stance, and crossed to the stove to check the pot. The lid rattled faintly as I lifted it, steam rising in lazy swirls, but my focus stayed on him. He broke the silence first, sliding the magazine aside with a deliberate scrape. "Found something spicy in your room," he said, his voice light, almost teasing, but there was a blade beneath it. My heart skipped, a sharp jolt that nearly made me drop the spoon I'd grabbed. I turned slowly, leaning against the counter, the granite cool against my palms. He tapped his phone, resting beside him, the screen dark but alive with threat. "One tap, and it's out there," he added, his lips curling into a half smirk, the kind that used to charm me when he'd talk about his college pranks. Now it felt like a weapon. The air thickened, the walls of my perfect kitchen, oak cabinets, framed photos of Tom and me on the fridge, closing in like a trap. My chest tightened, a dull ache spreading as I met his gaze. "What do you want, Mason?" I asked, my voice steady, a lifeline tossed into the chaos swirling beneath my ribs. I'd faced down CEOs, negotiated deals with stakes higher than this, but here, in my own home, I felt the ground tilt. He leaned back on the stool, crossing his arms, the smirk twisting into something harder, more knowing. The boy I'd watched grow up was gone, replaced by this stranger with a jaw set like steel and eyes that saw too much. "Let's keep it simple for now," he said, his words precise, measured like he'd rehearsed them. The vagueness hung there, a shroud over the room, leaving me dangling in a web I couldn't see the edges of. I gripped the counter harder, the cold stone anchoring me as my mind raced. He'd always been clever, top of his class, quick with a comeback, but this was different. This was a power play, a chess move I hadn't seen coming. Those Polaroids weren't just pictures anymore. They were leverage, a key to unravel everything I'd built, my marriage, my quiet life, the respect I'd earned from him over years of late-night talks and shared meals. I nodded once, a small tilt of my head, acknowledging the gauntlet he'd thrown down. "We'll figure this out," I said, my tone firm, carrying the quiet authority I'd honed in boardrooms. "But not tonight, it's late." I pushed off the counter, the motion controlled, deliberate, and turned toward the sink, rinsing the spoon I still held. His eyes followed me. I could feel them, a weight pressing against my back, tracing the line of my shoulders. The faucet's rush filled the silence, but it couldn't drown out the tension crackling between us. "Sleep on it," I added, glancing over my shoulder. His expression was unreadable, a mask of shadow and intent, but he didn't argue. He just watched as I dried my hands on a towel, the soft cotton rough against my skin. I left the kitchen then, each step measured, the tile cold beneath my feet. His presence lingered behind me, a shadow I couldn't shake, even as I climbed the stairs. The roast's aroma faded, replaced by the faint lavender from my room. But it offered no comfort now. Tomorrow would come, and with it, a reckoning I wasn't sure I could win, but I'd face it head on. I had no choice. Not with Mason holding my secret like a loaded gun. The morning sun spilled through the blinds, painting golden stripes across the oak floors as I stood in front of my closet, heart thudding. Mason's text from last night glowed on my phone screen, short and sharp. "Wear that red swimsuit today." I pulled it from the drawer, a relic from a beach trip years ago, bold and tiny, its fabric barely more than a whisper against my skin. I slipped it on, the straps digging into my shoulders, the cut high on my hips, leaving little to the imagination. It wasn't me, not the Grace who wore tailored blouses and sensible heels, but here I was, stepping into his game. I tugged a light cover-up over it, a flimsy shield, and headed downstairs, the house humming with the quiet of a new day. The living room smelled of lemon polish and summer air drifting through open windows. I grabbed a duster, moving through my routine, straightening cushions, brushing over shelves, each task a tether to normalcy. But Mason was there, sprawled on the couch, a book in hand he wasn't really reading. His eyes tracked me, a slow, deliberate sweep that made the room feel smaller. I bent to water the ferns by the window, the swimsuit shifting, exposing more than I wanted. His gaze was a physical thing, warm and heavy, sliding over my legs, my back. I straightened, brushing hair from my face, and caught him watching, his lips twitching into a faint grin. "You're glowing today," he said, voice low, a teasing lilt threading through it. I forced a laugh, turning to adjust a picture frame on the mantel. Tom and me, smiling on a pier, oblivious to this moment. "Guess I needed some sun," I shot back, keeping my tone light, but my cheeks burned. He shifted, stretching out, his t-shirt riding up just enough to show a sliver of tanned skin. The air buzzed, charged with something I couldn't name. I moved to the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water, but he followed, leaning against the doorway. As I reached for the pitcher, his arm brushed mine, casual, accidental. but it sent a jolt through me, sharp and electric. His hand lingered, grazing my waist as he stepped past to grab an apple from the bowl. The contact stayed with me, a phantom touch I couldn't shake. I busied myself wiping the counter, but my mind spun. This wasn't right, shouldn't be, but there was a thrill in it, a spark I hadn't felt in years. I glanced back, catching him on the couch again, a blanket draped over his lap. He'd set the book aside, his hand moving beneath the fabric in a slow, rhythmic motion. His eyes locked on me as I crossed the room. My breath hitched, heat flooding my face. Anger, yes, but something darker too, something that coiled low in my belly. "That suit really suits you," he called out, his voice smooth, knowing. I froze mid-step, the words hanging there, a dare wrapped in a compliment. I turned away, fleeing to the stairs, my bare feet slapping the wood. The swimsuit clung to me, a second skin that amplified every sensation. The brush of air, the weight of his stare. I reached my bedroom, shutting the door with a soft thud, and sank onto the edge of the bed. My hands shook as I pressed them to my thighs, the red fabric stark against my skin. What was happening to me? This wasn't the Grace I knew, the woman who'd built a life of order, of quiet strength. But there he was, downstairs, turning my world upside down with a look, a touch. I could still feel his eyes, the way they'd stripped me bare without moving a muscle. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the AC kicking on, but my pulse roared in my ears. I stood, crossing to the mirror, and stared at myself. Flushed cheeks, wide eyes, the swimsuit a bold slash of color against my frame. Shame warred with something else, something reckless. I'd spent years being the steady one, the rock, but now I felt alive, teetering on an edge I hadn't known existed. Downstairs, Mason waited, and I knew this was just the beginning. The game had started, and I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. The next morning dawned heavy, the air thick with humidity as I stood in my bedroom, staring at the short denim skirt Mason had demanded I wear. His voice echoed in my head from last night, smug and low. "That one, Grace. Nothing underneath." I slid it on, the frayed hem brushing high on my thighs, the fabric rough against my bare skin. No cover, no shield. Just me, exposed in a way that made my stomach twist. I tugged at it, willing it to stretch, but it stayed stubbornly short, a banner of his control. With a shaky breath, I headed downstairs, the house quiet, except for the faint chirp of crickets through the open windows. I grabbed the vacuum from the hall closet, the familiar hum grounding me as I moved through the living room. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, but I couldn't focus. Every step made the skirt ride up, the cool air whispering against me, a constant reminder of my vulnerability. Mason was there, perched on the arm of the couch, his phone in hand, but his eyes on me. I bent to pick up a stray pen from the rug, and the hem crept higher, my pulse spiking as I felt his gaze lock on. I straightened fast, smoothing the skirt down, but his smirk told me he'd seen plenty. "You're making this too easy," he said, his voice a slow drawl, thick with something primal. I turned to face him, hands on my hips, defiance flaring despite the heat creeping up my neck. "Or maybe I'm just playing along," I shot back, the words bolder than I felt. His eyes darkened, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before that smirk returned. Sharper now. He stood closing the distance between us in 2 easy strides, his height looming as he stopped just short of touching me. The air crackled, electric and heavy, like a storm about to break. I held his stare, my chin up, but my body betrayed me, a warmth pooling low, a rebellion against everything I knew was right. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the skirt, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver racing up my spine. "Careful," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear as he leaned in. "You're testing me." I stepped back, heart pounding, but the space between us only sharpened the tension. I moved to the bookshelf, reaching for a high shelf, the skirt lifting again, and his low chuckle followed me, a sound that wrapped around me like a tether. I turned, catching his eyes, raw, hungry, stripping me bare with every glance. It was wrong, so wrong, but the power in it, the way he looked at me, lit something I couldn't douse. The hours dragged on, each minute a silent battle. I dusted, I rearranged, I kept moving, but he was everywhere, lounging, watching, his presence a weight I couldn't shake. By late afternoon, the sun slanted low, casting long shadows across the floor, and I found myself standing before him again, the skirt teasingly high, my hands clenched at my sides. Something snapped, a thread of restraint I'd clung to all day. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his, a dare pulsing between us. Without a word, I leaned in, my lips finding his, in a kiss that was sharp, brief, a challenge thrown down like a gauntlet. It was fire, hot, reckless, a collision of everything we shouldn't be. I pulled back, breathless, my voice a whisper against his mouth. "What are we doing?" His eyes searched mine, confusion and want swirling in their depths, mirroring the chaos in me. "What we both want," he said, his voice low, a murmur that hit me like a blow. The truth of it stung, raw and undeniable. We stood there, the silence deafening, the weight of that kiss hanging heavy. The house, once my sanctuary, was a battlefield now, every corner charged with what we'd just done. I turned away, my legs unsteady, and climbed the stairs, his words echoing in my head. The skirt felt tighter, a symbol of the line I'd crossed, and as I reached my room, I knew there was no going back. Not from this. Night draped the house in a velvet hush as I stood before my mirror, the teal bikini shimmering under the bedroom's soft light. Mason's voice had cut through the evening's stillness an hour ago, steady and sure. "Meet me in the jacuzzi." I'd nodded, a silent yes that set my pulse racing, and now here I was, the fabric hugging my hips, its gold threads catching the glow like tiny sparks. The top framed me just so, a daring tease, while the bottoms clung low, accentuating every curve. I ran a hand through my hair, letting it fall in loose waves, then took a deep breath, the air cool against my bare skin. Each step downstairs was a choice, a pull toward something I couldn't name. The backyard was a quiet haven, string lights twinkling above the patio, their glow dancing off the jacuzzi's surface. Steam curled upward, a soft invitation in the night's chill, and Mason was already there, half submerged, his arms resting on the edge. Dark sunglasses hid his eyes, odd for the hour, but his head tilted as I approached, a low murmur escaping his lips. "You look incredible," he said, his voice a rumble that matched the water's gentle churn. I paused at the edge, feeling his gaze travel over me, slow and deliberate, a touch without hands. "Thank you," I replied, barely above a whisper, and stepped in, the warmth enveloping me like a sigh. I settled across from him, the steam swirling between us, wrapping the moment in a hazy glow. The water lapped at my skin, soothing and alive, as we started with small talk, a dance of words to ease the weight pressing in. "So, how's it feel to be the king of the cul-de-sac?" I teased, a smile tugging at my lips. He chuckled, rich and warm, leaning back so the water rippled around his chest. "Not sure about the cul-de-sac, but I'm definitely the luckiest guy here." Our eyes locked, a silent spark passing through the mist, and my cheeks flushed, a mix of nerves and something sharper stirring deep. The banter grew bolder as the night deepened. I stretched out, letting my legs float near the surface, the teal fabric peeking above the bubbles. His gaze followed, lingering where the water met my skin. "You're playing with fire," he warned, his voice thick, a promise woven into the words. I arched an eyebrow, leaning back against the jacuzzi's edge, the heat seeping into my bones. "Maybe I like the heat," I countered, slow and deliberate, a dare that hung there, heavy and alive. The air shifted, the playful edge giving way to something raw, something that pulled us closer, the water sloshing softly as our knees brushed. He moved first, a slow drift through the froth, and I met him halfway, our lips crashing in a kiss that burned through the steam. It was deep, searing, a release of everything we'd held back, days of glances, touches, unspoken wants. My hands found his shoulders, slick with water, while his slid to my waist, pulling me against him beneath the churning surface. "Do you want this?" I whispered between kisses, my fingers trailing down his arm, seeking an answer in his touch. "More than you can imagine," he murmured, his breath hot against my lips, his grip tightening as if I might slip away. The jacuzzi became our world, the water a warm cocoon that swallowed everything else. Doubt, rules, the life beyond this moment. His hands roamed, gentle but sure, tracing the lines of my bikini, while mine explored the planes of his chest, the pulse beneath his skin matching mine. Each kiss, each caress, drew us deeper, the bubbles masking the urgency building between us. I pressed closer, legs tangling with his, the heat of the water nothing compared to the fire igniting inside me. It was reckless, forbidden, but the thrill of it consumed me, drowning out the voice that screamed this was wrong. We pulled apart at last, breathless, faces flushed with more than the jacuzzi's warmth. Our eyes met, a silent question lingering as the steam curled around us. The night air brushed my damp skin as we climbed out, towels in hand, the coolness a sharp contrast to the fever still pulsing through me. He stood close, his hand brushing mine as we turned toward the house, the lights inside beckoning us forward. My heart pounded, a wild rhythm I couldn't quiet, and I knew whatever came next would change everything. The jacuzzi's hum faded behind us, but the heat of that moment clung to me, a promise of more I wasn't sure I could resist. The house was a maze of shadows as I led Mason upstairs, my hand wrapped tight around his, the teal bikini still clinging to my skin like a second pulse. The hallway stretched before us, its familiar corners softened by moonlight spilling through the windows. But every step felt unreal, a journey into something I couldn't turn back from. My bedroom door loomed ahead, and when we crossed the threshold, a surge of power hit me. This was my space, my rules. I pushed him gently, a playful shove that sent him tumbling onto the bed, the silk sheets rustling beneath him. He landed with a startled laugh, the sound breaking the tension for a moment, his eyes wide as he sank into the pillows. "Grace," he said, half breathless, propping himself up on his elbows. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I reached for the denim skirt I'd slipped on after the jacuzzi, the fabric soft against my fingertips. With a slow, deliberate motion, I climbed onto the bed, straddling him, the skirt falling away to pool around my thighs. The air thickened, charged with a current that buzzed between us. His hands found my hips, fingers pressing into my skin, a question and a claim all at once. I leaned down, my hair brushing his chest, and met his gaze, fierce, unguarded, stripping away the last of his defenses. Our lips met again, softer this time, but no less urgent, a dance of tenderness and need that built with every breath. My hands slid over his shoulders, tracing the lines of muscle beneath his damp shirt, feeling the heat radiating from him. He tugged the shirt off, tossing it aside, and I followed, peeling the bikini top away, the cool air a sharp contrast to the fire beneath my skin. His touch was reverent, hands charting the curves of my waist, my back, like he was memorizing every inch. I arched into him, a sigh escaping my lips, and he answered with a low groan that vibrated through me, a testament to the pull we couldn't fight. The room faded, the hum of the house, the distant chirp of crickets, until it was just us, bodies moving in a rhythm older than words. I guided his hands, showing him where I wanted them, my fingers threading through his hair as he explored me with a mix of awe and hunger. Each touch was a spark, each kiss a flame, building toward something inevitable. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, his name slipping out unbidden, and he pressed closer, his own breaths ragged against my neck. The silk sheets twisted beneath us, cool and smooth, a counterpoint to the heat we generated, the friction of skin on skin driving us higher. It was fast and slow all at once, urgent, yet laced with a care that surprised me. His hands gripped my thighs, pulling me tighter against him, and I felt the tension coil, tight and trembling, until it snapped. A cry tore from my throat, raw and unfiltered, as waves of release crashed over me, my body shuddering in his arms. He followed a heartbeat later, a muffled groan against my shoulder, his grip tightening as he rode the same tide. We collapsed together, tangled and breathless, the only sound our uneven breathing filling the quiet. I lay there, his arms around me, the weight of him solid and real. My mind spun, satisfaction warring with a flicker of guilt I pushed aside. His heartbeat thumped against my chest, steadying me, and I let myself sink into it. The warmth of his skin against mine, a comfort I hadn't expected. The skirt was a crumpled heap beside us, the bikini bottom still clinging to one hip, but I didn't care. In that moment, I wasn't just his stepmom, wasn't just the woman who'd held everything together. I was Grace, alive and powerful, reclaiming something I hadn't known I'd lost. The moonlight painted us in silver, soft and forgiving, as our breathing slowed. His fingers traced lazy circles on my back, a silent question in the gesture, but I didn't answer. Not yet. I closed my eyes, letting the sensation anchor me, knowing the world would crash back in soon enough. For now, this was enough. This connection, this victory over the chaos he'd unleashed. The night stretched ahead, heavy with what we'd done, but I held on to the strength surging through me. Whatever came next, I'd face it head on, with him beside me, whether I wanted to admit it or not.